If you like my dad's videos, please subscribe to QA Insights channel.
Thanks everyone for joining this week's Clubhouse meet. Last week I couldn't schedule because of my personal errands. So this week we have Shivam Mitra from LinkedIn, who is working as a SRE. We'll be talking about a day's life in SREs. So this week's sponsor is loadtestworld.com, where Redline 13, if you want to run your JMeter tests, scalable load tests, please check it out at redline13.com. And they have conducted the conference last week. So all the recordings are available in the loadtestworld.com, so you can check it out. And there are a lot of sessions about JMeter analysis and other stuffs. So please don't miss. So please check it out, loadtestworld.com. And without further ado, let us get started. Hi Shivam, how are you doing?
Yeah, hi Naveen, and hi everyone else here. Yeah, I am doing good. What about you?
Thanks, Shivam, for agreeing. Actually, I've been following up with you from past many weeks. I know you are a very busy person. So finally, I got a hold of you. Thank you for agreeing to do a session for us. So let me give a quick background about my performance engineers group. So we have around almost 400 plus folks in the group, and everybody has experience in performance testing and engineering. So everybody is, I can say, 2 to 3 years experience to advanced level. And we are just focusing on performance things. And also we are eager to upscale ourselves to DevOps and SRE world. So that's why we've been conducting many sessions about performance and other things. So I hope your session and your inputs will be helpful. Who wants to become a SRE or a DevOps world from performance testing experience. So I hope you'll be sharing your insights.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will try my best to share like whatever insights I have got from my experience as working as SRE. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So before we get started, please please note this session is being recorded, and once the session is done, I'll be publishing the audio in my YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. So Shivam, could you please introduce yourself briefly, and then we can get started?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name is Shivam, and I have been working as a SRE from last around 4.5 years now. I started directly as first I started as a DevOps engineer right after college, and I was working at DirectI in Mumbai for around 2 years. And after that, I joined LinkedIn as a SRE, and here I have been working for almost close to 3 years now. And so this is mostly about me, and I also have a YouTube channel where I basically teach on different subjects like operating system, Kubernetes networking, Linux, and SRE and DevOps stuff there. Yeah, so you can also check out my YouTube channel also. That should be there in my profile here in Clubhouse. Yeah, that will be also helpful.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Shivam. So my first question would be like the skill set. So what skill set a tester or any engineer should have to get into DevOps culture or the SRE world? So what are the fundamentals we should know, which will be helpful to get into that field?
Yeah, sure. So let me first discuss about responsibilities of SRE. So once I define the responsibilities, it will be easier to understand what type of skills are required for this.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So some of the main responsibilities for us is that we write a lot of code. So coding is very important, and we typically write code for developing some tools. So these are mostly internal tools which we develop by writing code, and these tools mostly either they help in maybe optimizing performance of some applications, or they may reduce toil for all the teams that we have at LinkedIn. So it may reduce a lot of toil. So we develop this type of tools by writing code, mostly in Python or Go, or sometimes maybe Bash scripts also. So yeah, mostly Python is more popular in DevOps and SRE world, and Go also has got a lot of popularity. So coding is one of the important, I will say, a skill that you need in order to become a SRE or a DevOps. And other than this, we also look at a lot of other issues. So one of the important responsibility for SRE is to go on call for the team. So typically there are a lot of teams inside a company, and each company will have a SRE team, and each SRE team has a on call. So the main responsibility for the on-call is that, so whenever any issues arise in the production, so maybe LinkedIn is down, for example, and there are some issues with some of the services at LinkedIn. On-call, who will be investigating that issue, finding the root cause for that issue, and fixing it, and also do post-mortem for that. So the main reason for post-mortem is that we need to analyze, right? Why did this issue happen? What could we have done to prevent this? And we try to have some preventive measures after that so that this same incident does not happen again. So when we are going for on-call work, because you require a lot of knowledge of Linux, because most of the machines in the production are Linux machines. So you require knowledge of troubleshooting Linux systems. Similarly, you may require a lot of knowledge of networking, because most of the companies now have microservices architecture where you have a lot of services and they talk to each other on the network. So a lot of computer networking is another skill that you require. And of course, fundamentals of operating system again are required since you are working on Linux machines. So knowing that, okay, basically, if you run any command, for example, so you should understand, okay, what does that mean, right? When you see the output of that command, you should understand, okay, what does this mean? What does the memory means? What is CPU means? And all of this. So coding, then operating system, computer networking, Linux commands. So these are some of the important skills for a SRE. And these are kind of basic skills which anyone require if you want to go into field of DevOps or SRE.
Got it. But I mean, the topics you told, it's very kind of a high level, correct? If you say, for example, any language or operating system. So how much expertise a person should have, like, say, a couple of years experience or 5 years experience to become a real full-time SRE? So how, because we can keep on learning, right? There is no end to learn new stuffs. So do you have any like a bar set?
So I do not think experience is a bar for this. I think if you are even, I mean, it depends on companies to companies. Say many companies do hire freshers itself as SRE, for example, and many companies may preference in the software engineering field, this type of field, for example. So it depends on company to company. And I will say that so these are the basic requirements. And I'm saying in the sense that you require a good knowledge of operating system and networking and Linux. You should have, for example, for example, because if you are going for interview, for example, most of the questions will be from this topic. So you should have a good understanding of this concept. Because even if you go for software engineering, there also they will ask maybe questions on operating system networking, because these are basics to computer science. But the type of questions in software engineering roles may be a bit different. I mean, software development, SDE roles, for example, they will focus more
Got it.
on this subjects.
Got it. Okay, cool. So, so morning once you log into your email account, right? So the day starts from there, from you, right? So how does your day goes? So you'll be starting any issues previous day, or you will just have meetings, lot of meetings. So how does your day looks overall?
Yeah, sure. So let me just add some more points to the previous topic of like what topics to study, and then I will proceed to, I mean, how a day looks in my life.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I told, these are the basic skills like coding is required, and then Linux commands, understanding them, operating system, and cover networking, and also our day-to-day work. For example, we also require a lot of knowledge of like system design, for example, because we are continuously working with developer team to design. To review RFCs, for example. So we need also good knowledge of system design, for example, understanding load balancers, understanding how scaling works, for example, database replication, for example. So we need to have good understanding of these subjects, because these are very helpful in designing any systems. So yeah, and also having a good understanding of troubleshooting, like how to troubleshoot issues in production, that also is very helpful. And one of the book that I will suggest for like understanding these concepts, for example, like how to troubleshoot issues and understanding more about SRE itself. So Google actually started this SRE culture. So they were the first one to introduce the SRE role in the industry, and they also have written around I think 3 books on this subject, SRE. And one of their first book is on just on SRE concept. It's I think the book name is Site Reliability Engineering by Google. So if you do a Google search, you will get it. So yeah, that explains that has very good explanation of SRE concepts and what are the responsibilities and how they operate at Google, like how they operate their infrastructure at Google, such a large scale infrastructure at Google. Yeah.
Got it. And in your team, you will have a DevOps as well, right? There is a one team will be there, right? Correct? As a DevOps
So
engineers.
yeah, so in my company we do not have separately like DevOps or SRE. We have only SRE. And for example, we have a tools team basically. So we have a different tools team. So they actually manage all the like something related to tools, for example, infrastructure itself, for example. And then we have separate SRE teams managing I will say different services, for example. So you can say that we have a central team, tooling team, and we have different SRE team again. And this tools team also have SRE teams basically, but their main responsibility is to manage all the tools that we have at LinkedIn.
So there are companies who hires DevOps as well as SRE, right? So do you have any difference from your perspective? What would be the core differences between DevOps engineers and SRE engineers?
So in my view, the company like which typically has a person for DevOps and SRE, I think the responsibility is different in my view. So the main responsibility of the DevOps engineer may be to manage the infrastructure. For example, manage the Kubernetes cluster, manage the CI/CD pipeline for all of this. Working on the reliability part itself, like for example, maybe the monitoring, for example, and looking at the reliability, and maybe they will have many other services. And maybe any company, for example, Flipkart, Amazon, they will have a lot of services also. Like they will have check-in services. They will have a feed page, for example, where they show all the items, for example. So maybe the SRE will be working on improving the reliability of those services there.
Oh, got it. Okay. So yeah, back to my previous question. So I would like to know how your day looks.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so mostly the day aligns according to the responsibilities we have. So we also have OK hours planning, and once we do the OK hours planning, we will have Jira tickets created for all of them. So most of the time will go into like some like we all will divide the OK hours. So most of the time of us go into those OK hours, and those OK hours will be mostly on maybe if I am developing some tool, writing some code, or maybe in some quarter I am just working on maybe improving the performance of maybe some service, for example, or maybe in some quarter I am working on maybe capacity planning, for example. So there can be different tasks, and mostly we try sometimes operation we can be operation heavy sometimes when there are a lot of issues maybe, but most of the time we try that okay we are working more on automation side, basically trying to decrease the toil for everyone in the company, those type of projects. So depending on what OK hours we have, we will mostly start working on that. And yeah, and there is one difference that we go on call per month, once a week. So that week is a very different. So we will not do any OK hours in that week. We will mostly focus on if we get some alerts during the on call, we will work on that. Or maybe if there are some ad hoc tasks, for example, maybe some ad hoc tasks that came after the OK hour planning, for example. So we will pick some of them and work on that during on call. Yeah, other than that, yeah, it's normal. Like work on OK hours, see the Jira tickets, and we also have sometimes we'll also be spent in meeting. Two maybe a week. You can say maybe 4 or 5 hours. Let's say goes on meeting. Yeah.
Got it. Could you please give me an overview about that on-call process? Because there are certain strategies they follow, right? Who triggers on-call and who manages the incident and who responds. And again, there is a cross-functional teams will be there. So can you give me just
Yeah,
high-level overview? Because
yeah,
we don't know, we never been part of any on-call as a performance engineers unless we work in production. So it will be helpful for everybody.
yeah, sure. Yeah. So, for example, like for us, it's mostly like we have, so it depends on services to services mostly. So I am a part of product team at LinkedIn. So we have products basically. So we also have developer team and we also have SRE team. So SRE team also, someone from SRE team also will be on call. Someone from developer team will also be on call because uh, sometimes we may also require the help of, I mean, a developer team to debug the issue because maybe the issue is with the code that a developer has written, for example. So we do have these two types of teams, SRE and sorry, two types of on-call here. And on the on-call, like how we follow on-call, it depends on size of the team. So let's say, if I have 5 person in my team, let's say, so we go round robin. So we start with 1 person, then the next, and we keep on going round robin. So on average, we go like 1 week per month on call. But again, it depends on team size. Like if you have maybe 14 members in the team, so if you follow the round robin approach, you may go on call once in like 2 months, for example. Yeah. And on call for us is one of the, I will say, best way to learn things in production. The reason is that during on call, you get to work on, like, you have issues in production, like you need to troubleshoot it, fix it. So you learn a lot in that. And it's not that you are alone. You're not alone. Like, you are of course the on call, but if you require help, you can ask your team, other members for any help. Maybe if you require help from other teams also, we have a central like knock team also, like who will manage all of these on-call incidents. So you can ask help from other teams also, because when you have microservice architecture, there is a high chance that a lot of, I mean, when you have incidents, it will not be only affecting a single microservice. It will typically be impact a lot of microservices. So we will also work along with the other teams also in fixing this.
Got it. Okay. So, which tool your LinkedIn uses for the on-call management?
Yeah, so we
PagerDuty
have
or something else, in-house tool?
yeah, we have a similar, I mean, tool like PagerDuty, but yeah, we have an in-house tool basically, which we use for managing the on-call. But yeah, it's similar to PagerDuty.
Okay. Okay. So, those who don't know about PagerDuty, so PagerDuty is one of the leading vendor in the on-call management. So they have certifications as well, like incident responder, and they have multiple certifications. So you can check it out their website. You can just give a try on those certifications. Okay, so let's move on, Shivam.
Yeah.
So after on-call is done, you will be preparing the post-mortem, correct? Any
So it depends. So
analysis?
if we have, yeah, so typically what we do is after the on-call is over, we do a handover mostly. So that is like whoever is going on call next week, we do a handover so that they understand, okay, what happened in last week, for example, they will have a context on that. And post-mortem is typically done in those cases, like which impacts the site, let's say, like maybe a lot of users were seeing issues with LinkedIn, for example. So we typically divide this type of incident, like whether that is major incident, minor incident. So if we have major incident, of course, we have to do postmortem for that. If we have minor, then we have to check, like, do we really need a postmortem in that? Like if we see that, okay, if you do a postmortem and we can prevent this issue from happening again, let's say, so of course we will do in that case. But if you see that, okay, there is no use of doing postmortem because, I mean, we cannot improve anything, or in that case, yeah, there is no need for that.
Got it. And I know there's a term called blameless culture, right, in the SRE world. So,
Right.
so what is your perspective on that? I mean, have you seen anything like people pointing fingers each other, or it will be most of the incidents will be like unless without pointing anybody, just solve it. So how it goes in your job?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the, I will say, major highlight in the SRE culture is like having Like we should not blame anyone, basically having a blameless postmortem. That is one of the culture of the SRE itself. And if you do not follow the culture, then SRE does not, I mean, make a lot of sense if you do not follow this culture. One of the advantages of this culture is that, okay, I mean, people can do mistakes. Of course, in when you are doing writing code or managing infrastructure, you will do mistakes as humans. So, and we should not be blaming somebody. So one of the main thing about this postmortem is that we should not blame anyone. We should look at, okay, how we could have avoided that, let's say, right? How we should avoided that. Like if somebody did this mistake, how we can avoid this, that, I mean, in the future, nobody else does the same mistake, basically. That's our main intention of the postmortem, how to improve the system. And so that this incident does not happen again. So that's the main highlight of the postmortem that you mentioned, like having and we typically, yeah, I mean, we do not blame anyone if they do a mistake in production. I mean, it's like we are human and we are surely going to do mistakes.
Yes, yes, yeah, I agree. Yes, thank you. So without violating NDA, could you tell me any incident you have been very tough to solve or you solved it? High level stuff, anything you'd like to share? Because we were not exposed to those kind of incidents in our because we work in stage environment. So anything you can just give some generic example, anything, something
Yeah,
out of
sure,
it?
sure. Yeah, sure. So I will, yeah, just I have to maybe I have not, I do not remember any of the major incidents. Maybe I have to go back a lot. But yeah, I
Yeah.
can remember. I can of course talk about generic incidents like what happens mostly. Like, for example, I am a part of product SRE team, and most of our applications are at the front end level. So, and we have a lot of metrics to track. We have alerts on a lot of metrics, for example. So basically, in the on call, we set up alerts on top of a lot of, like for services, for example, a service will have a lot of endpoints, for example. So we set up alerts on those endpoints, like maybe we monitor some of the important metrics, not all of them. So some of the important metrics can be something like a latency metrics, like what is the latency of that endpoint, or what is the error percentage of that endpoint. Like these two are the, I mean, most popular metrics that are we set up alert on for every service. And we set up alert something like, for example, okay, if the error rate goes above 1%, let's say, also for 10 minutes, for example. So for consecutive 10 minutes, if the error rate goes above 1%, then the ping. So typically through their phone call, they will be pinged on the phone that, okay, this incident is happening and your presence is required in that. So, and then we will typically it's not that, okay, typically you will think that, okay, how do you troubleshoot this? But we do have a lot of tools for this. So we, before going on call, typically we have a sessions like, in which they will study like, okay, before on call, what all things to uh, cover, basically, so that, okay, when they go on call, they are used to those tools, using those tools which can make the debugging very easier. So we do have a lot of tools basically for monitoring this. So if we see some errors, we will try to maybe, like for example, like whenever you see errors, so one of the main reason can be deployment, for example, right? Because maybe somebody has pushed wrong configs, or maybe wrong code in the production, and because of that errors has increased. So we will look at, okay, if we have some recent deployments, for example, maybe if deployments are also not there, maybe we will look at, maybe, okay, whether we are a sort of capacity itself, maybe a traffic, maybe some feed has become, maybe let's say popular, let's say viral, for example, and the traffic on the site has increased and we are not able to um, support that traffic, for example. So we do, before going on call, we do know that, okay, these are these are the most common issues that can happen, and we do that have in mind. But yeah, sometimes it happen that, okay, I mean, even these common issues are not there and some new issues has come out. So the typical process we follow is check the logs. Okay, maybe if there are increase in errors, for example, check the logs. Okay, in logs, what are the error you are seeing, and depending on what error you have in the logs, then maybe it can be, because since I told, right, we have microservice architecture. So check that, okay, if that error is coming from some other service, or whether our own service is generating that error. Depending on that, take the actions again. If it is some other team, then maybe we will also ask their on call to look into this, like, okay, because their service is generating the errors. If it is our team itself, we may ask the developer team, for example. Similarly, if there is an increase in latency, for example, like latency increase can also happen if you do not have enough capacity. And if maybe let's say if you have applications on Java, for example, and when you have, I mean, you do not have sufficient capacity, what can happen? The garbage collection metrics, for example, GC pause, this can increase in that case. So we have to see that, okay, whether these CPU metrics and CPU load, all of these are increasing. So that mostly means that, okay, we need to increase our capacity, for example.
Correct. And suppose, say, you are getting paged at, say, 3 a.m., so you are in a sound sleep, right? So what is the backup? So what will do that particular trigger incident? You are not acknowledged that incident. So what will happen to that incident?
So typically what happens is if you do not acknowledge, it will get forwarded to some other, mostly maybe manager or maybe secondary on call. So typically in many teams, we have primary on call and secondary on call also. So it depends on the rules which you have set up. For example, if you have PagerDuty, you will set up the rules. For example, okay, if let's say in 10 minutes, if the primary on call does not maybe pick up the phone, let's say if they do not acknowledge, it may be that okay, let's ping the secondary on call maybe. Even if the secondary does not maybe ping the manager, for example. So it depends on level. So maybe after manager, even if manager does not pick up, for example, then maybe manager of manager basically. So it keeps on going basically. There are separate rules in that typically. We typically keep 2 to 3 levels because sometimes it can happen that maybe primary on call may miss the phone.
Okay. Basically, it may reach till CEO in some cases if no one is picking up. Right? I mean, it will not happen in the real world.
It's mostly it will mostly not happen, but mostly it may go maximum to the manager, and then so if let's say I am not there, maybe somebody else will go and see the incident and they will help in that.
Correct. So these management will be done by the some other respective team who is managing all the incidents, correct? Who has to get the alerts, who has to get the phone calls, and what is the cycle it should follow, right?
Yeah, so we have like phone calls typically, they will go to us only whenever there is alert. But there is a central team also which manages all this. They know overall infrastructure, what is going on in that, like what are the alerts that have fired, which teams these alerts are, responsible, which teams are responsible for these alerts. So they keep watching the overall infrastructure and they help in managing everything. So because most of the incidents do require a collaboration from multiple teams, so they help in that.
Correct. So as you know, right, recently Facebook also has gone down for about 8 hours, right, for more than 8 hours. So sometimes it will require the PR attention as well, correct, in the companies. So there will be people, HR or PR, right? They will take care of all the communications outside to the public. So how the incidents will be handled in that scenario, because it needs public attention. So who handles this PR related stuffs apart from the technical aspects? So any insights on that?
I don't have much insights on this, but there are different teams who basically, who manage this, like basically managing like the communication part, for example, right? And whatever they post, for example, right, publicly. So there are different teams which are responsible for this.
So in the on-call, even the PR team also will be part of your on-call in that case, correct? It should be, because otherwise they would have not known whether it should be communicated to outside world or not.
Yeah, so if there are any major incidents, of course, all of the company will know that, right? If let's say Facebook is down, right? So that's a major incident, right? So everyone in a company will know that, okay, Facebook is down, right? Maybe through
correct.
email communication or maybe through any other communication. So so that is the different communication basically. And on-call will not be worried about those part basically, right? They will mostly be worried about fixing this as soon as they can, right? Troubleshoot and fix this issue.
Correct. Yeah, but somehow the pressure would be there if everything goes down, like I say DNS outage, right? Last week, Facebook or BGP protocol, something. So your team will face the pressure, correct, to fix the issue as soon as possible.
I will say depends. As I told, mostly what happens is that in these are major incidents. It will not be just one team, right? Because if you have a DNS issue, for example, not only one team is impacted. So a lot of people will be involved in helping, like in maybe someone from other teams also will be helping in trying to find out root cause and fixing it. Of course, the main team will also, of course, will be focusing on that, but other teams also will be helpful in that because if they will be aware that, okay, Facebook is down, for example. And about pressure, it depends. I mean, pressure is not always good. I mean, you cannot like put pressure on them, right? Directly that, okay, do it in 5 minutes, do it in 10 minutes. It will not be very good in my view because if you increase the pressure, there is a high chance that it will not be fixed in that time, basically. So it's better to keep your mind, I will say, relaxed during these times. Try to at least, yeah, of course, it's difficult, but try to keep it relaxed. And of course, in most companies, I do not think anybody will put pressure on your team that, okay, do it within 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or something like that.
So there is no micromanagement approach in the SRE culture, right? The managers, they don't micromanage you when you're on
So
call.
yeah, so managers, I mean, what I have seen is like, from my experience, they support, I mean, they provide a lot of support, I mean, and these micromanagements, I feel are not very good. Like if you put pressure, because for SRE, if your responsibility is on call, and if you have, I mean, if you are not relaxed during on call, you're not going to do good, basically, right? If you do not get proper sleep during on call, and if you are maybe worried about something else during on call, there are high chance that you will not be able to trouble them. So it's better to.
Correct.
That's what the whole company supports. That okay, that you should not have this pressure and all.
Got it. Sure. Okay, let us take some questions from the audience. Please raise your hand if you have any questions to ask to Shivam. Okay, I am admitting a couple of folks. Hi, Sid. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Naveen. Hey,
Yeah,
Shivam.
please go ahead, Sid.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hey, thanks, Shivam, for giving deep insights on SRE. So, what I understand from your explanation and everything, Shivam, so it's kind of
Sid, could you please a little
production
bit
support.
louder? It is very not audible.
Yeah. Yeah. How about now? Is it okay?
Yes, it's better. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I feel like it's more like a production support. Just correct me if it's related or not. And I have a couple of questions like. You as a SRE, what is your roles and responsibilities for any incident? What is your job per day? Okay, oh, you have to do this and this and this, like postmortem and reason for problems and everything. And the second question is like generally, yeah, I do work in microservices. I had got a chance to troubleshoot in production support once. Like you said, we have a different approach. Like we have a war room where everyone will be sitting there and trying to do support whatever we can do. And third question is like, what level coding you do? Generally, coding is has been taken care by developers. Yeah, you are explaining a little bit like creating alerts and everything. So these questions I have as of now, Shivam.
Yeah, sure. I will try to answer this. So yeah, first, SRE is not production support at all because only the on-call, right? As I told, on-call is basically around, if you see, maybe 1 week per month, right? Maybe 30%, let's say, right? For example, 25%, for example, right? So that's only the uh, support. Basically, we are on-call. That's all, basically. Otherwise, we do not. And otherwise, like if you're not on call, you're working on other regular projects, basically. Maybe, as I told, maybe trying to develop some tool, for example, or trying to optimize performance, for example, all of this, and trying to reduce the toil using some automation. Of course, then automation again, it may be coding, for example, in some cases, and in some cases, maybe you are using some tools already that are there and trying to design some other system which can help, for example. So yeah, so that is the first part. Regarding war room, it depends, Simon. So war rooms are created for us also if we have some major incidents. In minor incidents, typically, like for example, we can directly on the chatting platform we have, for example, we can do all the communication there itself if the incident is minor. But yeah, of course, if it is a major incident, you will have war rooms and multiple teams and multiple people will be there discussing about how to fix it. And on coding side, what type of work we do? I mean, setting up the alerts is typically not coding. I will say it's typically some maybe YAML or maybe some other this type of code. Coding is mostly like developing some tool, for example. So what developers do is developers typically write code for the website itself, right? So they will, for example, if you have to add some new feature in the feed, LinkedIn feed, for example, so developers will work on that. So they will write that code for that. But we as SRE, we do not work on writing code for LinkedIn itself. Like we write maybe developing some tools, for example, which can reduce that while. So every time we monitor, okay, like, okay, which are the things, okay, which are, we are increasing the toil in the team, for example, we monitor those things and we keep a note of these things that, okay, like we are doing this work manually and we can automate this basically. And if we, so we include that those in OK hours basically, and someone can pick this up. And of course, then you have to design it, okay, how we can reduce that toil in, and maybe if some code is required, for example, maybe if you are developing some CLI tool, for example, right, in Python or any other language, which can make it easier. Let's say now the process was that, okay, you went into X place, then to Y place, and then to Z place, and then you got the answer, let's say. So there you were going at 3 different places to find the answer. What if somebody can write a code, for example, where you have to only go to one place and you get the answer, for example. So that reduces the toil for everyone, not only for you. Maybe there are other customers also, internal customers for this work, for this tool, for example. So it decreases the toil for others also.
Yeah, thanks, Shivam. But there is a limitation on that kind of tools production, right? Once sufficient tools are available, so there may be no chance of writing another tool which can automate the manual work, right?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, yeah, when that time will come. Of course, if that time comes where you do not have any manual work, right? Of course,
Yeah,
our life will mostly free, right? We can directly go and maybe write
true,
code
true.
for the LinkedIn itself, right? Otherwise, right? But yeah, I do not think, yeah, of course, it's very tough to have a infrastructure where there will be 0% toil. Even if, of course, you have serverless and everything coming up, even in that case, it's very tough, I mean, to have a environment where
Yeah,
no
anyway,
toil is there.
manual and man intervention is mandatory. That's I agree. And one more important question, like what type of SREs? Like, see, we do come across before SREs, we have a developer, tester, DevOps guy, and even network engineers and everything. So how do they assign this kind of SRE you should be? And let's take your example. What kind of roles and responsibilities you are as a SRE? You can give generic, not related to your regular job.
Yeah, so basically, the main focus for SRE is keeping the site up. So that's what site reliability engineer is. So our main focus, the first, I mean, basically, so if you, for example, if you take example of Facebook, for example, like if Facebook went down, so SREs will be the first one, basically, that who will be pinged that, okay, Facebook has gone down, basically. So they will be the first one who will start investigating this issue and trying to find the root cause for this. Because SRE, their main role is to keep the site up, basically. And so that's my main responsibility. And typically we say site up, but that's typically service up, because site is basically a combination of a lot of services. So that's typically keeping the service up like most of the time. So of course, having 100% availability is again not that easy. So we try to have some SLOs, basically service level objectives, like, okay, what is the availability we are targeting? For example, we may target 99.9%, for example. So we do agree within our team that, okay, there are a chance that we will not be able, like, there are chance that, okay, that whatever percentage is left, for example, right, site may go down for that time. We all agree on that. And that's the main part of having the SRE culture. We know that failures are going to happen. Like we should be ready for that. So that's why we try to, I mean, maybe develop tools to detect it better, for example, right? For example, if we have tools, maybe like some teams also work on machine learning, for example, right? Develop some tools which can help us catching some anomalies, for example, in production, for example, using some graphs and all, for example. So that's our main responsibility. Our main focus is that keep the site up, maintain the reliability numbers, what we are targeting, and try to improve it. But of course, we never target for 100% because the investment required for 100% is a lot high, and it's not guaranteed also that 100% can be achieved.
True, true. I was asking about more responsibilities of group of sites. See, there is an incident which is says your microservice is not available, so incident is created. So a couple of you folks will be jumping in and on call and start digging in, right? So what
Right, right.
individual responsibilities, like what is your responsibility? So do they segregate? SRE1 has to do a kind of development work. SRE2 has to do networking. SRE2 3 monitor the metrics. I was kind of interested in that information, Shivam.
Okay, so when we have incidents, for example, it's typically the on-call who will do most of the work. So that's what the main responsibility on-call is. So they will be looking at metrics, for example, like okay, which metrics has gone bad. They will look at all the other graphs. They will look at logs. So it's their responsibility basically to look at everything. And in some cases, as I told before, other teams' help will be required. For example, maybe you think that, okay, there are, maybe let's say I am part of maybe some service X, for example, right? And maybe I have some endpoints, for example. But sometimes the issue may be with the networking itself, right? Not with my tool itself. Maybe the issue is the networking infrastructure. And of course, networking infrastructure is managed maybe, let's say, by different team, Y, let's say. So of course, I have to first investigate and find out that okay, the issue is happening from the networking side, and maybe in most cases, networking side will also be aware that okay, there are some issues because they also are having some metrics on their networking side, so they will know that okay, there are some issues happening. Then we will of course then sync up and inform to them that the issue has happened, and if the issue is from our side itself, then we need to, of course, for example, most of the issues are maybe errors, increase in errors, for example. We need to see that, okay, how the error has increased, right? From the logs, you have to find out that and maybe involve again, because we have not written code for that, right? Mostly developers have written. So maybe we may involve that, we may involve developers in also in that to look at like why that is happening. Maybe somebody has pushed a bad code during the last deployment, for example. So we may need to roll back maybe in some cases, for example, in that.
So generally, how many SREs will be available for any single incident? Like you will be coordinating everyone and looking, saying that boss, you development you have to involve and networking team you have to involve.
To clarify that every team has a SRE. So my team has a SRE, so I am the main person responsible for that as a on-call. And if the networking team has another SRE team, they also have on-call. So they are responsible for everything related to networking. So all the teams, like whatever SRE teams we have, each SRE team has a on-call, and it's their main responsibility, right? If you need help, of course, I can engage others also. Like for example, who are seniors in my team and who have more knowledge of that. I may involve them also, but that is the worst case scenario if I'm not able to handle it on my own, for example.
Yeah, that answered everything, Shivam. Thanks. I was kind of looking in how many SREs will involve in any single incident. And to become an SRE, what level coding I have to be prepared? This is my last question. Sorry, I will give another chance.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So coding, it's basically
I think Shivam is taking some water, I guess.
Sorry, Naveen, I'm bombarding with a lot of questions.
Uh,
I'll stop with this, and later you can give the chance to you.
yeah, just give me 1 minute. Just
yeah,
Take your
sure.
time, Shivam.
Sure, thank you.
Sorry. Meanwhile, Naveen, you can give your insights if you have any answers, which I asked.
No, yeah, we are performance engineers. We never been part of production. I've been part of production issues, but not as a traditional SRE on call. Yeah, probably. Yeah, in future it may change. I don't know.
You will get, because Naveen, last month I have involved in microservice, which was giving the problem in prod. So since reorg happened, so there is no product owner or business owner for microservices. I have to involve I have to play kind of SRE role. I have to keep on gather everyone and get the teams involved.
Correct.
It's kind of war room. Yeah, I think.
Yes. Hi, Shivam.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, when I speak continuously for a long time, it happens sometimes. I would drink some water. Yeah. So yeah, coming to coding part, yeah, we do not require, I will say, very high level of coding as developers require. I will say, but yeah, we should be good at like following the good practices. For example, at least if you develop some tool, for example, right, you should write. Maybe dog for that, right? Having a dog for that, having some comments inside the code, and also following the best practices, for example, so that because that tool is developed for the whole company, right? Even if you leave the company, for example, others should also be able to contribute to that. So you should write in such a manner. But of course, we do not see for developers what happens. They have to write such a code that like their code is in production basically, right? All they have external customers, for example, so they have to keep a lot of other things also in mind. But when we are developing tools, we are mostly developing it for internal purpose, for example. So, okay, for example, UI, for example, right? If somebody is writing code for LinkedIn, for example, so they have to take care of having the, I mean, of course, the best practices and best, I mean, design that they can do. But for us, since our tool is internal, I mean, of course, we should have a UI. I mean, but even if that is not very perfect, for example, that's working. Okay, you maybe if you have just some form, okay, and you fill that up, even if that's not a very hi-fi UI, it's fine. I mean, because mostly it's used only for internal purpose. Similarly, for code also, I mean, the requirement for scaling, right? Since only the internal team is using that, the scale requirement is different from like what code the developers are writing for LinkedIn, for example. So it's fine even if you like um, do not design for that much scaling, for example, right? What developers are writing. So I will say that okay, you do not require that much knowledge that developers require, for example. But yeah, you should follow the best practices of like using whatever tools are available for writing code at LinkedIn, for example, framework and all. Then follow this, like have comments everywhere. Follow the best practice, right? When you have errors, then you should catch them. And I mean, do not write just the code directly, right? Use classes, all of this. So follow the best practices that we have.
I was asking in terms of in the point of interview. So even if
Okay,
I'm
okay,
attending for a SRE, so what kind
okay,
of coding interview I should be prepared for?
okay, okay, okay.
So what?
Yeah,
I hope
in terms of
you have
coding,
that in YouTube video, right? I mean, you
yeah,
said.
yeah, I got it. Yeah, yeah. So in terms of yeah, for interview perspective, yeah, mostly, I mean, of course, DSA is required, like, but not like software developer interviews. You should understand data structures as well, algorithms also. But yeah, of course, not like what you see, like maybe hard problems or medium problems on lead code. So mostly, if you are good at solving at least easy problems on lead code, in my view, that should be fine mostly because even in easy problems on lead code, for example, basics of data structures are covered. So yeah, you should have good understanding of like time complexity, for example, right? You should understand how to calculate time complexity of your code. You should understand, okay, how much space your code is taking. So that's why knowledge of DS algorithm this becomes important in that, but not of course that high knowledge as a software developer.
Thanks a lot, Shivam, and thanks a lot, Naveen. This is a live example. I mean, earlier to this, we are only reading through the SRE articles, Google's, and everything. But you are the live person. You was giving insight. Thanks for arranging everything, Naveen. Thanks, Shivam.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
Sid.
yeah.
Hi, Kronal, Amarnath. If you have any questions, you can.
Uh, yes. Hi, Naveen. Hey, Shivam. Shivam, I was just hearing back on the responsibilities of an SRE. I heard a couple of times that we are like as an SRE, it's the responsibility to keep the services up. Now, um, like what I'm trying to understand is um, on the front end, is the SRE responsibility only to take care of the front end, like on the production and on the lower environments, or it is also doing the performance testing on the back end microservices? Because when when we say like a front end, then it would call maybe hundreds of microservices, and there would be few other items to the front end also. So what does like looks in the SRE scope when we talk about any of the applications? If you can give some insights on that.
Yeah, sure. So So typically we have different teams, for example. So on the front end side, for example, right? Maybe front end is your traffic, for example, like traffic layer, for example, where I mean, it may be some load balancer, for example, right? Where it is the first point of contact whenever a user visits or your website. So that is traffic layer, let's say, right? So for traffic layer, maybe different teams are managing that. They will have let's say different SREs team also. So it depends. Like if your service is in production, typically they will have a SRE team. But if your service is not in production, maybe let's say maybe developer team itself can handle everything. For example, it depends on like how critical your service is, and a lot of responsibility to SRE comes like on call, for example, right? If you do not have a very critical service, like maybe even if your service is down for 1 2 hours, right, it's fine for you, then it's fine. Maybe developers team, they can handle it, for example, right? They can troubleshoot it. But if your service is very critical, even 5 minutes of downtime can cause a very huge loss to your company, for example. Like for example, Facebook, right? 8 hours, so their loss will be in, I think, millions and billions dollars, right, for them, that 8 hours of downtime. So it becomes very critical for the SRE team there to, because SRE knows the best practices, right, on them, and also do this. Not that developers cannot do this, right? And we should also encourage our developers also to have the reliability part in mind whenever they are writing some code. Understand that, okay, like what can go wrong, for example, in that, right, in the worst case. But as a developer, what happens, it's tough for them also, right, to write code also, design also, and also manage this, right? It becomes very tough for them also. That's why this role is a bit divided. So even SRE also, right, they are mostly working on like coding part and automation part, but other time, like on call and other time, they are improving the performance of the applications. And on the team wise, as I will say, it's not that, okay, only one team has SRE, every team has SRE. I mean, whoever are in production, maybe database team has SRE team, traffic. Maybe there are other teams also. Maybe just, I mean, mostly you have three components mostly in most architecture, like front end. Then you have a lot of applications in between, and then at last you may have databases and maybe caching also initially. So each of these critical components have database. Sorry, has SRE teams.
Okay, so it's like SRE is there for each team, and it's the responsibility of SRE to take care of the performance testing in the lower environments, and then when it goes into prod, also be on call, like whenever there are prod issues or like rotation shift that happens as a part of support, the production support, right?
Yeah. So main responsibilities, right? I mean, like we also do a lot of design reviews, for example, right? Whenever a new code is being written, we also have collaboration with the developer team, and we do the review for that. So our main focus is on reliability. So we look the code in terms of, okay, like what can go wrong, right? Maybe if somebody is writing some code which can increase the traffic on our website, for example, so we have to prepare for that before pushing that code into production. So we have to be ready with sufficient number of machines to serve that traffic, for example. So that, I mean, we do take care of that type of reviews, for example. That's why, as I told, right, one of the important things to, like, if you're going for interviews, so understanding design part, right, high level system design, like load balancers, replication, scaling, all of this is also important in that.
Okay, yeah, and as a part of the SRE role, are you also responsible for like synthetic monitoring and like setting up the alerts and maybe like thresholds for alerts, like um, also in case of
Right.
like if we have an EKS, like our services are running on EKS, and uh, we have a threshold for that as well, like for auto scaling. So how is SRE responsible to decide all the thresholds and bring up the auto scaling in place, or is it the architecture who would or it would be an architect who would pitch in here, and along with an SRE will decide the auto scaling factor or the thresholds here?
Yeah, so I will say it depends on again on teams to teams, but for example, we do take care of, for example, alerting part, right? So alerting is not alone done by SREs itself. So of course, we have to understand also from developers, right? Like because when you are putting thresholds, right? You will put thresholds depending on how critical the alerts are. So you also need to understand from the development team, right? Okay, what is the critical? How critical is this alert, for example? And depending on that, you put alerts. And of course, in the future, you also need to tune it. So that's also one of the main responsibilities of SREs to set up monitoring, set up alertings, set up the thresholds. But of course, we do not do it like we also collaborate with the developer team because they understand those endpoints, like how critical it is. And depending on that, we set up the alerts, and we also, of course, monitor those. Like maybe we have to sometimes tune those alerts, for example, in the future because maybe the current threshold is a lot noisy, for example, in that case.
Yeah, Shivam. I think that answers all of my questions. Yeah, thanks, Shivam, for your time.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Naveen.
Kunal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hi, Amarnath.
Thanks, Shivam. Thanks
Please
for
go
your
ahead.
time today. Actually, I thought of asking two questions. One is asked by Sid and another one partially from Kunal. Actually, I would like to understand like how do you involve in performance testing and engineering activities, or they'll be, I mean, that will be a separate team will taken care by. I mean, do you have a dedicated team for performance testing and engineering activities as well? How different it is? I would like to
I mean, SRE has a lot of relation with performance engineering since we also try to tune the performance and for example, right, load testing, for example, right. So of course, we are,
So
I
you
mean, there
do,
are
I mean,
separate
load
teams.
testing as well, or there is a separate SRE will not do load testing only. He'll
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
So again, so typically, yeah, different. There are different teams who handle, for example, load testing. Because for load testing, again, you will have different code written, and even your load testing, right? Whatever tool you have for load testing, right? You also need to have a good reliability for the like. I mean, load testing should also be. There can be issues with load testing itself, right? Maybe you are not measuring. Doing the load testing right, for example. So there will be maybe separate SRE team, development team for just managing that tool, for example. But all SREs team, like whatever services will, I mean, our load testing will be done maybe frequently. I mean, let's say maybe every week, for example. And we will see the numbers, okay, what's the load testing for our service, for example. And we need to see that, okay, whatever traffic we are thinking, like what traffic will come in future, do we have sufficient capacity now or not? And if we do not have, depending on load test numbers, we may need to increase. So that's also one of the main responsibility, I will say, but not conducting the load test itself. Of course, there will be tools for doing that, but yeah, understanding those load test numbers and taking decisions based on that is also one of the main responsibilities.
so you'll be regularly interacting with the load test team. I mean, performance test and engineering team, right?
Right. So yeah, we will be mostly looking at the load test numbers. We will be looking at that frequently, and yeah, if there is some help required from, let's say, the load testing team, for example. So yeah.
So if you find any issues in the lower environment, so like you will be suggesting developers what to fix and where to fix, or developer will like how the interaction happens.
So again, it depends. Like if you know the root cause, for example, and you know that why this issue is happening, so of course then you can directly communicate to them, right? This is the bottleneck, and we need to maybe improve that. But let's say, okay, you don't know the root cause, for example, right? It can happen because
Okay.
maybe that because there is separate team, right, for other things. So you do not know the root cause for that. So maybe you may tell them that, okay, this is the issue, and maybe then you both try to find out the root cause. And if, let's say, if that team is responsible for that, then of course they will fix it. But of course you can suggest it if you know the root cause that, okay, this team is having some issue with this code. Of course you can, and they will work on fixing those.
Okay. Okay. And SRE is like only responsible for front end related like microservices and other things, or even database part also.
No, it's not. So
Database part.
it's for every service which affects the production, basically. So database also, right? Even if
Okay.
database is, so it's service up, right? Any service that affects the production, right? Database is one of the major ones that affects the production, right? So of course, database, traffic,
Okay.
for example,
Network.
every other service that is critical, right? All the microservices that are critical in nature for the company, for the site up.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Navin, for that.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Yes, Shivam. So I have one few questions actually.
Yeah,
So when
sure.
it comes to observability or monitoring, so what kind of tool sets Microsoft uses? Of course, I mean I don't think they will be using any commercial tool. So what is the tool stack looks like for SREs?
So yeah, we do have internal tools, but yeah, I mean the stack is similar to what you see, for example, in open source, for example. So, for example, you will have something to emit the data, for example, right? Some tool to emit the data to some central database, for example, right? Time series database where all this data will be stored for every maybe every second or something, right? All the data points are stored. Then you have a visualization tool basically, right? For example, Grafana is there in open source where you can see all these graphs. You can plot all these graphs. And if we have similar to that, where we collect the data, then we have some tool to show this as a graph, for example. Then you can, of course, do some changes in graphs also, right? If you want to see 1 day data, 2 day data, what do you want to see? You want to see average. You want to see maybe something else, right? Some other metric, for example. So all of these features are there, like similar to what tools we have in open source.
Okay, so there is no commercial tools you guys are using for monitoring or observability, like Dynatrace or App Dynamics, something like that?
So I will say it depends on, I mean, again, team to team. If some team requires, right, for example, right, it depends on requirement to requirement. If some teams require that, of course, they can use it. Some teams does not require. They can, I mean, if we have enough features in whatever we have developed, for example, right,
Correct. So,
then
so for load testing also mostly like JMeter or Locust, open source based tools, correct?
so I cannot comment much on what tools LinkedIn uses, but yeah, it's combination of both open, like using some of the open source also, and also maybe it depends on requirement to requirement, right? If we will also use, for example, vendor specific also if there is requirement, right? For example, and many of the tools that are developed at the LinkedIn itself.
Got it, got it. Okay. Hi, Pawan. Thanks for joining. Pawan, you're on mute.
Hi, good morning, Navin.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for
Morning
joining us.
or good evening.
Yeah, hi,
Yeah,
Pawan.
hi. Hi, Shivam. So, see, I mean, I actually kind of missed a very good part of the conversation. I could not join early. Just there in this room for the past 5 years. I will definitely look at the recording, YouTube basically. But I just wanted to, I just had a question to you. Uh, see, site reliability engineering means a different, even though the overall process and the implementation and the framework around it is kind of kind of technology agnostic, right? So, but from the industry perspective, whether we are looking at product or services, right? So we have a different view to that. Now I just have a question to you: is let's say if I do let's say I have a request for proposal in front of me, right? And I want to approach a customer. So customer would be basically approached in two ways, right? So one is what is the existing kind of operations, so as to say plethora of with the combination of DevOps plus SRE and plus chaos or whatever it is. So my question to you is how do I take this as a as a kind of a win-win situation to a potential customer in a in a lead funnel, right? So that is one question because see from the technical aspect we all know that as you have beautifully explained probably what we do, what is the process, what is the tool, because to build a SRE team is a very big investment, right? Because it basically has a mixed pool of knowledge with a side, kind of side hustling between, DevOps, SRE, performance architects with observability, so on and so forth. So how do I uniquely place and sell the SRE, and what is the return of? I mean, have you ever given any return of investment with respect to whatever that is being done, for a particular customer? So I just want to understand this. Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, so in terms of customer, I'm not sure if you're, I mean, since like, for example, most companies that I have worked, right? So they were mostly like the customers were mostly the normal users, for example. So, but yeah, if you are mostly talking about maybe B2B companies, for example, right, where you have external customers like business customers, for example, right? So in terms of like how much return of like whatever you how much returns you make on investment by SRE, for example. So again, it depends on how you execute that, right? Like SRE is a very as you see, right, it's a very big field in itself, right? And it depends on like how you execute it. For example, in the initially, for example, right, the blameless post-mortem part, for example, right? So that if you do not follow this, for example, right, maybe that if you whatever investment you do, for example, it may not be very good, for example, if you do not follow that, for example, because again you are going to create the same issues again here, right? So the main focus of the site reliability engineers are on improving these metrics and like SLOs, for example, right? One of the important metrics through which you can track, right? Whether you like you have to define metrics for this, right? If you are doing some investment, you have to follow some of the metrics that okay, we are doing good on that. So SLOs for each of the service is one of the metrics that we use, for example, to understand, because our main responsibility is site up, right? And we should be able to keep that metrics up whatever we are targeting, for example. So if we are able to do that, so of course we are whatever investments has been done in the SI, right, that is working. For example, postmortems, for example, right, driving the postmortems, making sure that okay, postmortems, okay, it's not okay. You have to define postmortem in a good way, right? Blameless way. If you define postmortem in like some way, right, okay, everyone comes and somebody blames that okay, he has done this thing, and you do not do anything, you just blame it, and you do not have any action items after the postmortem, then there is no use of postmortem at all, right? Postmortem is done mostly for to make sure that those type of issues will not happen again. Make sure that. So if you are able to find out that, right, basically you are preventing that thing from happening again, right? So of course that's a very good return if you are able to do that. And other than that, SR is typically what yeah.
So Shivam, not take too much of time. I understand. So what do you mean by postmortem, and how do you break that to a return of investment? Because uh, this is a classic scenario even in our load testing or in our performance engineering aspect. Maybe Naveen also can resonate on this. I mean, how do you actually give a return of investment to the customer based on the bottlenecks you have detected? And the site reliability engineering perspective, it's even a broader picture, right? Because we are basically looking at the end-to-end stack with various deployment patterns. If there is a microservice, you have a various deployment patterns. If it is a site reliability engineering, there are again different patterns. I mean, deployment methodologies like blue deployment or a green deployment and all those things, right? So it's just that my point of view, because without giving a point of selling or for a minimum value, for a what do you say? I mean, for a MVP kind of thing, we will not be able to sell the proposal to the customer. Otherwise, it's just that as a part of the organization, you just build a pool of engineers where you call them as SRE, DevOps, and all those people, right? But how do you take that as a thing to the customer? I
Yeah,
mean,
so
probably
okay.
this question was more lengthier, but if possible, you can give me a short description, or maybe we can take it in the next session. Thank
Yeah, sure. You can think in other terms, right? Let's say if you do not, so as I have told, responsibility, everything, right? Let's say if you do not do SRE way, right? If you do not do the SRE way, so what other way you are going to do? Like, let's say, right? You have infrastructure, right? You have to manage it, for example, and you know that if your infrastructure is maybe if it is small, maybe even developers can manage it, for example, right? If it's very small, but if you have a infrastructure that is quite big, and you know that even your infrastructure going down for 5-10 minutes, right, will impact a lot of customers. And one of the important points I forgot to mention also is that, like, we also try to for example, deployment part, right? You mentioned, right? We also try to increase the velocity of deployment, like, because I mean, like most of the big companies, right? They do a lot of deployments per day, right? So we have to make sure that a lot of deployments go on a single day, right? Even let's say if some of the deployments is missed, it may also, I mean, it will also be not good, right? Because developers are writing code and their main, so if you see the main incentive for a developer, they have to write code, push into production, right, and make it live. And SREs, we also try to make this smoother for them, that okay, this will not also face any issues. So think about scenario where you do not have SREs, right? So what type of maybe engineers you will have to manage this type of things, let's say, and then think of, okay, if that gives you a better return than SRE, that's fine, right? If it is not, then you may follow a SRE pattern in that, like whatever responsibilities we have, for example, in terms of deployment, monitoring, in terms of automation. And also SREs, since like SREs mostly, they are not mostly like for developers, right? They mostly write code, right? SREs also do know a lot about overall infrastructure, right? They will also know a good amount. They will also have some knowledge about traffic. They will have some knowledge about database. Of course, not as like what database SREs will have, but they will have some knowledge which will be helpful in like multiple incidents in such a way. So they do have a good knowledge of like how the infrastructure is designed at any company. They know most of the things, and that becomes helpful. Like maybe for example, you are collaborating with the developers and they have some doubts, right? You can help in that also. During incidents, you know that okay, this may be causing the issue, because when you have microservices, right, it's not that you should only know about your microservice, because you are connected with every other microservices also.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Shivam,
Yeah,
for your
yeah,
insights.
yeah. And
Thank you.
I will
Really,
also
thanks.
suggest, right? Yeah, and also, Pawan, I will suggest you to read that book, like, because Google has invested a lot in SREs, for example, and they have written a book like from what they have experienced, right? How the SRE process has made, like, for example, managing the Google infrastructure better, right? So you will get a lot of insights from that book also.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I picked up a very good book on SRE actually. I've been reading onto that, but it seems like a lot of things in a Pandora box, right? There are a lot of things to be understood there, and I think I guess that is what makes this particular thing very challenging and very rewardable also. Yeah. So thanks, Naveen.
Hey, Shivam, I have a last question.
Sid, your voice is breaking, Sid.
Is it okay now?
No,
How about now? Is it okay?
no. It's still breaking. It's not audible. Probably you can give me offline chat. Your question, probably we can touch base with Shivam.
How about now, Naveen?
Yeah, now it's fine. Yes.
So I thought of asking Shivam, how about you people touching in Java design patterns and code profiling?
Yeah, so
You
I
people,
am not. Yes, I am. Yeah, so it depends on like engineers to engineers. I mean, like SREs also. Some people also get like SREs, as I told, vast field, right? And many of them also deep dive into like the code itself, right? Profiling and all. But I mean, it's not, I will say, our main responsibility as such. But yeah, we do have to look into that. But some of the engineers are very good at that, and some of them maybe, for example, like if I'm not good at that, maybe if I will ask other person, right, who is very good at that, for example, to maybe look at the profiling, because sometimes issues can arise, as I told, right? Maybe your garbage collection metrics gets impacted because of some reason. So we may ask someone who knows a lot about this to check out that.
yeah. Thanks, Shivam. That's
Got it.
answered my question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
thanks.
collaborative.
Right.
SRE as a team, also work as a team, right? It's not one person
Yeah, because
organizing.
it's
Correct.
not easy to have all of this, right? Since you have a lot of things to look after, right? So somebody may be very good at maybe monitoring part, for example. So we will take help from them, for example, like if they have very good knowledge of that. Similarly, for example, in profiling and all, right, optimizing performance, right, for Java applications, if somebody has good knowledge of that, we will take help from them also and try to learn that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, many thanks, Shivam, for your insights. Definitely, it was helpful for many of us. So the session will be available in my YouTube channel, so you can check it out. So thank you, Shivam. So how can we touch base with you if someone has any questions or any insights?
Yeah, sure.
Need from
Yeah, so my LinkedIn profile is there on here in the profile here in the Clubhouse itself. So yeah, you can contact me there itself for any if you have any doubts or anything.
Sure. Thank you, Shivam. So before we leave, this week's sponsor is Redline 13. So if you want to do a large scale JMeter test, please check it out at redline13.com. So next week we'll have another interesting topic to coming up with another guest. So please watch my LinkedIn posts for further updates. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Yeah,
Take care.
yeah. Thank you,
Bye.
Naveen, and everyone who joined. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivam. Bye.
Bye.